everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Crusaders. I'm your host, Nemesis, David Howard, and I'm so glad that you are back here joining us for another episode where, as always, we examine older movies that have to be at least 10 years old, and we're going to go back and we're going to re-review them, look at them, and then eventually rate them on how they, what our rating is and how we think they would translate to a modern audiences. However, this movie is a special case. There's so much going on with this movie that we're about to talk about that we have decided to split this into two parts. So, what movie are we going to talk about? I'm sure you're all out there asking. Well, we're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's seminal science fiction adventure. As my friend Jeff Bracey, who's about to be on, said, this movie almost out-Matrixed the first Matrix, and I can't agree with him more. Yep, Inception. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my co-host for the show. First of all, you know him, you love him. He is a comic book writer. He is a published writer of short stories and perspectives from ASAP Comics. He's also my co-host, one of my co-hosts on Sloppy Spoilers, Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing great. I'm actually looking forward to talking about the inception of Inception, as it were. And really, when you think about this movie, it's just so complex, and Christopher Nolan gives you a lot of real meat story-wise to work with, just with the idea of it. Never mind getting into the execution of it. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Absolutely. And then this next man needs no introduction. He's an artist. He's a writer. He's a creator. He's an innovator. He takes lives and breaks hearts. You know him. You love him. He's on Sloppy Spoilers. He's all over the place. It's Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Oh, you're talking about me. Oh, wow. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. Hey, man, it's good to see you guys once again. And I think Steve really put it properly, the inception of Inception, because this movie does, and it earns it. It earns it in the way The Sixth Sense does. It has incepted us because people are still talking about this film years later, still debating, still theorizing. It's gotten stuck in our head like the Inception. So, hats off to Nolan for that.
Absolutely. Real quick before we get started, I want to do a couple quick shout outs. First of all, if you're interested in advertising on a show, please contact us. We're always looking for advertisers, but we do have a couple shout outs today. First of all, on the Comic Crusaders swag shop, you can find swag for all our shows, but we have Cinema Crusaders swag. So, Steve, show off that sexy shirt. Yeah, Cinema Crusaders shirt. We also have Cinema Crusaders stickers. We've got Comic Crusaders stickers. And even if you want to, I wouldn't suggest it, but if you want to, you can pick up your Nemesis sticker. So they're out there.
I will say I do love my shirt. It's very comfortable. It's very soft. It's really looks good, I think.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to give a shout out. One of my friends is, as you know, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so she is raising money with her charity for breast cancer research. And they are selling these shirts, barbells for boobs. So if you like boobs, if you support boobs, get out there and buy your boob shirt right now. Get out there. You got to do it. Get that boob shirt and support boobs because boobs are important. So, and I think we can all agree with that here. So, all right. So without further ado, let's get into this movie, Inception. So Inception is the 2010 film by Christopher Nolan, science fiction. I am not going to do a plot breakdown here because, like I said, we're going to do something a little different here where we are going to break this into two parts. We're going to talk about the concept of Inception, the concept behind the movie, and also the execution today, the filming of the movie, the special effects, everything they did. So we're going to get into detail on that. So I'm going to let my co-host and I break that down in more detail. However, I did want to start with this question. For all of you who haven't seen the movie really is the classic mind F. I'm not going to throw the actual word out there, but you're not really sure what is real and not real by the end. And there is a scene where the main character, Leonardo DiCaprio, has a totem. His is a spinning top, and he spins that to see what is reality, because if he's in reality, the top will end up falling. And he knows that he is in real life real life. I put that in quotes because that's one of the concepts here. Versus if the top just keeps spinning, real life physics isn't taking place, and so he knows he's not there. And Christopher Nolan evidently had a scene filmed where they actually show what happened, and instead he decided to torture us all for eternity by cutting it off and not letting us know whether the top spun or not. So I have to ask the question, and I'm going to start with Shade Wing and come around to me. So, Steve, did the top fall or did the top keep spinning?
They really leave it ambiguous, and I think it's arguable one way or another. Personally, I kind of lean towards the top falling. It looks like it was starting to fall as they cut it. I think that's kind of one of the big things. And also, it's just kind of one of those things where you sort of think, okay, if it was all a dream, then what was the whole point of everything that they did? Because technically it never happened. It just happened in his mind. I will say, though, that as far as the idea of it, this is just one of those ideas which, as you say, is a big mind up all over the place. Because they do take it one step further than the Matrix, as Jeff was pointing out, in this one sense. I recently was talking about the Matrix with Mike Nunnally, my publisher, and he was saying about, can you really tell what's reality and what's not? Could everything be a simulation? And so I really was drawn back to the idea of Descartes, where he was thinking, okay, I can't trust anything my senses are. But when you get down to it, I know I am real because I think, therefore I am. You can't even get that with Inception. Matrix, you can do that. You cannot do that with Inception. Because how do you know that everything that you think was not planted by somebody else getting in your mind and planning it? Right. So that takes what was already a really screwy idea and just, taking it 10 steps further. But I will say, rather than saying that I have a definitive answer on the top, I have a preferred answer. And that is that the story to me is more satisfying if the top falls and he really did get his kids back.
I think that's a great answer, and I agree with a lot of that. Okay, let's go to Jeff. Jeff, what do you think? Did the top fall, or was the top still spinning at the end?
Okay, on the first point, I do like the idea that the ending is left ambiguous, and I do give Christopher Nolan credit for giving us the chance to think about it. I like that. I will say that knowing that he did film an ending is far less egregious than the director of The Grey, who filmed an awesome fight between Liam Neeson and a wolf and never friggin' showed us, even though that footage is out there and he's teased it. Screw that guy. But on to the topic at hand. Now, we see the top wobble, which should be an indicator that physics is taking place. Leonardo is going to have his happy ending. It's the fairy tale ending. It's the happy dream ending. My big issue with that, I don't know why the top wobbles. I don't know if that's just a wish fulfillment on his part, perhaps a little bit of subconscious. But the thing I keep coming back to is the picture of the children. And as Leo is leaving, he's exiting the door, and we see the children at the exact same age, at the exact same angle as that frozen shot in the picture. And that leads me to believe, despite the fact, I agree with Steve, it's more satisfying if this is the end. Otherwise, what's the point of everything? Except that I think he's still in there. I think he never recovered, just as his wife never did, and he's lost in a coma somewhere.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to agree with Steve and say that for me, it's a much more satisfying ending if I choose to believe that the top fell. However, I was firmly convinced that the top fell for a long time. And then I got into this rabbit hole where people were debating this. And I saw some of the points that you were bringing up, Jeff, especially the point about the children. And I think that's absolutely valid because the main character here, and so let's start getting into a little bit of the plot. The main character here was involved in this technology that allows you to go down into your subconscious and you build worlds. And it really is interesting because the subconscious, if you think about it, our reality is just a bunch of electrical signals, electrical impulses and chemicals firing off in our brains, telling us what our reality is, And so this is what Christopher Nolan is playing with here. And eventually, Leo DiCaprio's character, and let me pick up the name so I don't.
Dominic Cobb.
Yeah. He went down there with his wife, Mal, and Mal didn't want to come back. And he was trying, she was convinced this was their reality. And so Inception is this idea of planting an idea in someone's mind and making it real for them. And he did this to his wife. And he did it so well that when they came back, his wife was convinced the real world was the fake world. And that in order to get out of the real world, because in order to get out of the fake world, you could kill yourself, and come back. And so she committed suicide and was so committed to this idea, she planted evidence to make it look like Leo's character did it. And so he's on the run and had to leave his children and leave the country. And so I tell you all that to say that he has been away from his children for, I think, 3 or 4 years. And so it is very compelling to me that, at one point in the movie, they mentioned that the faces, he never sees his children's faces. Mm-hmm. And because he can't vision them growing up, what their faces look like. And so as the movie ends and he's going to have the reunion with his children after his father-in-law picked him up, he never sees their faces, and they look exactly like the kids from the last time he saw them when he left, and which is not realistic. So it's like you really get these conflicting messages, and there is some evidence there to make you believe that most of the people, I think, got out, but maybe Ken Watanabe's character and Leo DiCaprio's character didn't. Maybe they're stuck down there in this hell, this limbo,
I want to take this one step further and make it even crazier. The whole thing is a dream by Christopher Nolan. The whole thing is a dream world created by Christopher Nolan. And if you look at DiCaprio, he looks a lot like Christopher Nolan.
He actually does. So let's break into this. I'm going to start with Jeff here first. Let's get into the inception of Inception. I think one of the brilliant things about this movie is there are so many science fiction concepts here, all tied up into one movie, and they don't step on each other. So I wanted to really go around because all of you guys are writers. You all love science fiction. And so I wanted to hear what stood out for you, and we could get around and talk about these concepts because I think this movie is brilliant and that it introduces so much stuff to think about and it messes with your mind. That's the thing, is there are no easy answers here, which is kind of the point of science fiction. The classic science fiction was about stretching our understanding and pushing boundaries. So I thought that was great. And I wanted to hit off with Jeff. And feel free to bring in the plot points of how this tied into the movie because
right.
We kind of left that off. So,
in my own comic book world that I've been building for a long time here, my main protagonist is a character called Mr. Happy. He's basically powered by dreams. He's kind of like living wish fulfillment, daydreaming made real. He literally gets his power from dreams. He has to replenish his powers by sleeping and therefore dreaming. And so I did a little research into this as I'm building the character and developing the story. And I had my own little Inception moment where Mr. Happy talks to the quote unquote the artist, the creator, and he's discussing reality. Is like, what's real? Like if you're making me, like who's making you? This whole sort of thing. And he's like, a dream is just is just a form of reality that you don't fully accept, or that you can accept completely. And that's kind of where I feel all of this goes as a science fiction premise. It gets in the whole idea of like, what is real? And going back to the Matrix, when they're in the Matrix, they bleed, they bruise, they die because they fully believe what's going on in the Matrix, even though it cannot have a physiological response on them. That's the power of the mind over matter, the brain over the body.
Well, and, can I make a point on that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I am so bad with character names. I can't remember the character name, but the guy who sells them all out in the Matrix is sitting there eating a steak with Agent Smith, and he goes,
"Oh, that's
yeah," and he goes, "I know this steak isn't real. I know this is just a bunch of ones and zeros, but it tastes great, so I really don't care." And basically, he's like, "I don't care." So It's really exactly what
Yeah,
you're hitting on right there.
And again, like I think Nolan might have been inspired by The Matrix, because Cypher's whole reason for doing what he does is his disillusionment with his reality. So he says, I've decided that ignorance is bliss. I just want you to give me this good life, and then I want to forget everything else that's ever happened. And that's sort of what happens to DiCaprio's wife, is she gets so invested in this dream world when they kind of get stuck in there. And she decides, this is better than what we had on the outside anyway. And DiCaprio wants to get back to the real thing because, our real children are out there and all that sort of thing.
I would take it also and connect it with another Nolan movie, Memento. Because the entire twist of the character is that this man is basically living a lie that he is telling himself because he can't remember what really happened. So he has no purpose if he doesn't have his quest for revenge. So he's killing all of these people so that he can have a quest to have a purpose. It seems like Nolan is really dealing with the idea of people lying to themselves, people basically living in a false reality for whatever reason. And I think these two movies definitely have that in common.
Yeah, Nolan's, I really like his films because this outside-the-box thinking and this deep exploration of these ideas. Now, for me, being an artist, I'm very interested in the visuals as well as the techniques or the story behind. So this film speaks to both aspects of me, getting into these ideas of what's real and what's not. And, of course, this is accompanied beautifully, visually, by a lot of really intense things, like Elliot Page folding the city around them. A move which, just to show you how good this is, if you've got a good thing artistically, it will inspire others. So what do we see in Doctor Strange? They recreate that very motif of the blending and shifting of forms of our surroundings around us. One of my favorite bits is they make MC Escher's artwork real, as Elliot Page is the architect, and she designs these spaces, and they get in this whole thing about creating these Escher-esque landscapes so Joseph Gordon-Levitt can have an advantage in combat with other beings in the dream, whether they're actual dreaming people or just people that are created by the subconscious of the dreamer that they're in. And I just it's something that your brain knows is impossible, but as an artist and a fan of Escher, it totally delights me, and I just love the concept of it. Because once again, I'm also a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and he talks about strange, impossible angles and how they warp and twist reality. And now I'm seeing this visually in a film. When they're fighting in testing things out, and they're fighting in a staircase as a test, and he runs around, disappears, and now he's up there behind you. I love this sort of thing. It's like the less oppressive, less horrific side of Lovecraft turned into like a sci-fi sort of trope. And I just love everything about this movie, the way they do these things. So hats off to Nolan for creating a very stimulating world visually and story-wise.
I think one thing I'd have to add to that, though, is that Nolan also recognizes the fact that you can only mess with the reality so much when you're touching the human brain before the human brain rejects it, you know? And it's kind of what Lovecraft was talking about as well. That sense, you see this in horror movies all the time, where they bend things at unnatural angles, and it just bothers you in a visceral sense. You don't know why it bothers you. You don't know why it terrifies you, but it does.
Well, I like that you bring that up, because in Lovecraft's response, the protagonist's mind can't deal with that, so they shunt into madness. The brain just won't accept, and so it defaults to that. But here this is like the lighter side of that sort of esoteric. Nolan has this thing where when the brain won't accept, it just breaks it. The train coming through the scene. They're like, what is this all about? Because that's that rejection. So it's going to show you something so impossible that you're forced not to agree with what you're seeing, because we're visually oriented creatures.
And to expand on this a little bit, what Jeff was talking about. So in the plot, Elliot Page plays a character who is recruited to be the designer.
She's the architect.
She's the architect. And so she's developing worlds, and these worlds have to be mazes because they're contained. You can't have, an expansive world that's as huge as the earth. So you have to be able to always drive people back to where you want them to be, but it has to be reality. And so she is given a test in the movie of whether she could design a maze quickly, um, and do all these different things. And eventually she's very good at being an architect. And one of the reasons they do this, and she's an architect, is because they're trying to hide the outline of the world from Haas's, Mal's consciousness, which is now in Leonardo DiCaprio's subconscious. I mean, just explaining it, I'm looking at everybody's heads exploding out there. But he was so intertwined with his wife that the subconscious of his dead wife exists in his mind and will sabotage everything she's doing if she knows. I mean, that's how screwed up this movie is, and how wonderful it is because it's screwed up. So
yeah, I'll just say one last thing on this real quick.
Yeah.
And there's a movie that does something similar called Dark City, about I don't want to spoil it too much for people, but there are people who are stuck in the city that they can't leave, and there are always all these factors that keep you within the city. And this movie takes that to an even greater degree in the way that they kind of twist things around to always keep the target within the environment that they want them in.
I love that movie as well. And now that you say that, it makes me wonder if Nolan was inspired by that a little bit. So, yeah, Steve, what expanding on what we're talking about, what concepts, science fiction concepts here, really spoke to you, and how did they factor into the plot and things like that?
I would say just the idea of dreams. I was influenced a little bit by Neil Gaiman's Sandman way back in the day. And I had like cyberpunk ideas that I wanted to explore. And one of them was the idea of dreamware, the idea of hacking somebody's brain through dreams. Nothing came of this. And honestly, I gave up on it because this movie did the idea that I had so much better that I'm just like, yeah, Nolan's the master. But it was an idea that kind of stuck with me, and maybe I'll do some permutation of it in some story eventually. But that was kind of where sort of my head was with related ideas to that. With regards to Inception itself, I definitely had some definite ideas about this. Christopher Nolan, to me, seems like somebody who is fascinated by the process of creation, by the process of writing, and the process of making worlds in terms of storytelling. And where I first noticed it was in another movie he did called The Prestige, which honestly is one of my favorite movies ever.
Fantastic.
And the thing that I had noticed in the subtext of this is he seems to be exploring the concept of writing as a magic trick. And you can definitely see when he talks about the 3 acts, leading The Prestige, it's the 3-act structure, things like this. I think he's taking that a step further with the idea of actually creating worlds and all of this sort of thing. And I think it goes back to the English Romantic tradition, because they were also interested in this. The Romantic poets like Wordsworth and Longfellow and, Keats and those sorts of people. They were interested in the process. They were interested in exploring, where inspiration comes from. And I think that Nolan is taking that even further, kind of inspired by that, working it in with this science fiction conceit. And so you have a case where he's exploring, how do ideas come? And so, the idea of somebody being able to plant something, in your subconscious and then have it sprout. I just think it's really, really fascinating. If you look at it in those terms, you can definitely see that it's a thought experiment on Nolan's part to explore the creation process. I love that kind of stuff. As a writer, that's kind of stuff absolutely gets me. But both with these and those movies, and with In the Mouth of Madness, which is basically about a rogue character going rogue. So if you look, those kinds of movies where there's a definite subtext about the creative process, is really, really fascinating. And I think where Nolan goes with it, particularly with the idea of the subconscious, because one thing that you kind of see with Cobb is that this is a guy who doesn't think that he can hack it anymore, because his subconscious ruins everything he does, because he's so obsessed with his dead wife. He's so filled with regret, and obsessed with the idea of rejoining his kids, that he's sabotaging himself. He doesn't think that he's worthy, and so he needs to get somebody else who has a fresh viewpoint, to bring to the table to create these worlds for him, so that he can get back home with his family. I think that's absolutely amazing. And if you really pick it apart and look at it on that level, it's a really interesting perspective.
Absolutely. Um, for my part, I think what I take from this, I mean, obviously, all your points are very well put, and I agree with them, and I took stuff from that as well. But I think one of the amazing things here is at this point in our technology, and I say at this point because who knows where we're going, we don't have this Inception technology yet, but it's not so far out there that you couldn't see it coming to be real in some form. I don't know, what form it would take, but in some form. However, what really grounds this movie and I think makes it that much more visceral for everybody is that Nolan takes this, future sci-fi tech, and if he had left it at that, it would have been almost like a fantasy type thing. It's something that would be unreal. But he grounds it with these very real things that we understand now. These two questions. One of them is that question we've already touched on a little bit, and I want to go around the horn and hear your guys' thoughts on this. Is this idea of ignorance is bliss, and we would rather be happy in a lie than unhappy in reality. And I think in 2012 or 2010, when this movie was made, that was already something that was really powerful for society because we were already dealing with, escapism on so many forms. People escaping into social media, people escaping into video games, people escaping into just a whole host of things,
Mm-hmm.
And escapism is not bad as long as you're grounded in reality. That's my opinion. There's a lot of people that don't share that. But when escapism becomes your reality, then I think society as a whole begins to suffer. And I think that Nolan was hitting on a little bit of that, and definitely looking at, there are a lot of people who are willing to accept the lie as their reality and be happy rather than deal with the facts of what is actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. The second thing that I thought was just so fascinating is there are so many psychological overtones to this movie about the psyche of the human being, the psychology of the human brain, how our thought processes work. And they really get into some depth and detail on what is the genesis of an idea? How do ideas form in our brains? And so to bring this to the plot point, the whole central plot of the movie, once the movie gets going, Ken Watanabe's character, and guys, help me out with his name in the movie if you know it. Saito. He controls a energy conglomerate, and Cillian Murphy's father, Cillian Murphy's character is named Robert Fisher. His father has created this huge company, and his father is dying. And what Saito wants is for Cillian Murphy to make the decision on his own to break up the company so that Saito's company has a chance to compete against this global conglomerate. Right off the bat, that seems very realistic. I mean, we all know that industrial espionage is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, right now, you can't, implant the idea in someone's brain to be, hey, sabotage your company, But if the technology was there, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. In fact, I think it's very reasonable to expect that people will try and do stuff like this. Hence, there's a whole industry in this fantasy world where people train powerful people on how to defend themselves from this technology, and that's kind of what Steve was talking about, where a train comes crashing through. Your brain has been trained to shake you out of this fake reality. So, I without getting into too much, going down the rabbit hole too much, this character, they want him to have this idea. Well, to do this, they need to understand everything about this character, what his relationship with his father was, how the two of them get along. Does he feel like he wants to follow his father's footsteps, or does he want to live up to his father's expectations? All of these things, they need to boil it down. And this is where Tom Hardy's character comes in, who is the rogue. Tom Hardy's character is called Eames. And Eames is a rogue. Eames is a thief. Eames is a counterfeiter. But Eames, like all good rogues, like all good thieves, understands human nature. And he's the one that can look at a situation and boil it down to its essence. What do we need to do to plant this idea in someone's mind and make them take it and grab it and hold on to it as their own and have it, bear fruit. And I think this whole concept is just so fascinating because this is some really deep level philosophical thinking about our ideas and where they come from and how, I mean, to a certain extent, it even happens now. It's like if you want to brainwash somebody, if you want to mentally abuse somebody, this is the kind of thing goes on. After years of mental abuse, someone can actually start to believe that, doing something bad for themselves is good because this has just been rammed home to them. This is just shortening the process. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I kind of wanted to hear your guys' take on that. I'll start with Shadeway.
What was the question?
What's your take on the whole idea of the psychological aspects here, the human nature aspects?
Oh, okay, yeah. I will say that a lot of it is really, really fascinating in terms of the way that they do this. I love the idea that Cobb basically is self-destructive, and so his subconscious is always, inserting things where they shouldn't be. So yeah, you get the train, going through trying to stop them. You get Mal, showing up periodically. You have selling him out to Saito in the cold open. All of these sorts of things, and the subconscious element, always kinds of creeps in where you least expect them. Using the weird dream logic sort of things. So all of this is really, really interesting. And so you pretty much have Ariadne coming, the Elliot Page character, coming in and basically having to be his therapist because his subconscious is like one of the biggest antagonists in the movie, probably more than anybody else. And when you start, and also you start looking as well, you look at how Fisher develops, and you see Fisher kind of going along with the idea that they want to plant, but at the same time, he's not like meekly going along with things. He's questioning things. He is looking at the situation. And he's gradually changing his mind about his uncle or his godfather,
who's played by Tom Berenger, Browning. Another great performance. And I'm just going to say for everybody out there before I give it back to Steve, this is why we split this into two parts, because the cast of this movie is incredible, and even the small parts are done very, very well. And we felt that it would be giving short change to the movie as a whole and to the cast if we tried to cram all of this into a shorter time frame. So anyway, I'm sorry I digress. Back to Steve. So
yeah. But I will say, like, the whole thing is a Christopher Nolan ensemble. Like, all of them are really great, and it never feels like anybody dominates the movie in any way. But yeah, in terms of all of that, so you get all the development of Fisher, as he questions his reality as well. But he eventually kind of decides, I think I'm going to do that. I think this is the way that I'm going to make peace with my father. He's being manipulated into doing this, but at the same time, it is his decision. He is the one that ultimately, decides, this is the best way to move forward with my life is I'm going to build my own company. I'm not going to just, to rely on what my father did. I'm going to try to essentially move forward the way that I think that he would have wanted me to, on a positive note.
And what is so fascinating there, and to bring out a plot point on what Steve was just talking about, the way they got Cillian Murphy's character, Robert Fisher, to agree to decide to break up his company is they manipulated reality and his concept of how his father felt about him. His father was a wretched person. And we really don't know exactly how his father felt about him, and neither did Robert Fisher. But they made Robert Fisher believe that his father was disappointed with him, not because of what he did, but because of what he failed to do. Because Robert Fisher's father wanted him to go out and be his own man and make his own company. Who knows, if that was real or not. But they made him believe that. And so that's why he decides to break up the company.
Yeah, but I think part of it is has a certain basis in reality. Because one of the things that we find out is that essentially the Tom Berenger character, Browning, is gaining power in the company, because he's the one that's handling the estate and all of this. And it does look like he is ambitious, like he is trying to use his position, to gain power for himself. And he wants to be, basically in charge of the company when all the dust is settled. And one of the things that the Dream Thieves do is they point out that this guy is not trustworthy. They turn him against him, and you might look at it in a sense like, okay, basically it's a form of manipulation. Yeah, but are they wrong? Not really. So a lot of that is what leads into the idea of breaking up the company.
I think it's interesting you say that, though, because I see it a little bit differently in that, yes, they turn him, Robert Fisher, against Browning. But I think that what they're doing there is that they from the outside, they see that Robert Browning is getting power, but they're playing on natural human emotions. Everybody gets a little paranoid or a little bit worried and things like that. And so they play on that to build a reality. I mean, it's insidious. To be honest with you.
It is. I mean, there's definitely a hugely shady idea to it. And I think this is why all of these characters are rogues, really. But one thing that is kind of interesting is they basically devalue the father figure that's alive so that they can build the relationship with the father that is dead. And it's really, really kind of interesting, because if he doesn't have the Godfather to rely on, what does he turn to? He has to find some way to make the other relationship work.
Yeah,
and it's manipulative for sure.
There are so many layers here, like we said. I mean, I could probably spend an hour trying to explain the whole plot to you, just talk about the plot, and because there are just so many layers of things that are going on. And this is one of those movies you could watch multiple times and probably take something new every time. Jeff, what are your thoughts on what we were talking about here, the psychological things? What kind of stuff did you pick up on? Because you were always picking up on new stuff and seeing different things as well. So
I'll tell you, the roughest thing is not going first, because like you spark so many ideas hearing what you guys are talking about. It's like, oh man, I need to be jotting down notes to keep up with all this. It's like, oh yeah, like it gives you new realizations all the time. So here's a couple things I was thinking of. I want to address the Inception technology. I think it absolutely exists today, just not in this form. We've seen social media manipulation like we've never had before in the last few years. We've become very much aware of that. And we've seen how algorithms guide people into thinking certain ways, favoring certain products. And, the whole thing, they keep talking about fake news. And I see that
almost like, it's almost like Inception is being done to the body, the global body of humanity, instead of the individual.
Sure, you can classify almost everything as fake news, to use the popular term, because the genius of I'm a big World War II buff, and studying things like the rise of Nazism and communism during that time, the effect of propaganda by constantly saying the same things over and over again, constantly like, pictures of, Hitler being an artist had that aesthetic. He's like, show me the most grandiose sort of form and all this, and the very iconic imagery, which really got into people. And that's another form of Inception. It's nothing new. It's just being used in a very subtle and covert sort of way. So, it's bad enough they get into what we consume all the time. Once if they get into our heads, then we really are sort of doomed.
I think
cognitive behavioral therapy works in a very similar fashion. So you can basically incept yourself in a way.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting you say that, because one of the things I'm constantly talking with my wife about is that it seems like in this modern age, I don't know what is real and not real a lot of the times. What is true and not true. I cannot, and I like to think that I am not a unintelligent person, but I have a hard time knowing what to believe and what not to believe. So what is reality and not reality now?
If you aren't like physically interacting with it yourself, you can't trust anything. I remember when I first started working with Photoshop, I was like, well, I can never believe anything I see again. That's a digital picture. I just can't trust it. And then we started getting into high-end CGI. I was like, oh, I can't believe moving pictures. Now we've got the Face app that allows you to put your face into a movie scene. It's like, holy crap. And recently they came out with a technology that allows people to almost perfectly recreate somebody else's voice. You speak into it, and like the example was they had Jordan Peterson's voice coming out of this guy was speaking into his technology, and it came out as somebody else's voice. It's remarkable. So it's art imitating life, or life imitating art once again. So there's that idea. So I fully believe Inception is here, and it's been here a while, and it's just getting more and more inceptive as we go. On to some of the ideas here in the movie is now. My background in the military is in psychology. As a behavioral science specialist, which isn't like high up. I wasn't like the big dog psychologist, but I was trained to observe and evaluate and make judgments on people as to what sort of treatment they should do for whatever behavioral issues they were having. Thinking about what you guys were saying, how this is very insidious, the breaking down of one relationship to building up the other relationship inside the fantasy, because they wanted it to be his idea. Now, I'm also a big fan of like the show Leverage, which me and my wife finally got to see all 5 seasons of that on Amazon Prime. And there was something about Gina Bellman's character, the grifter, who talks about playing the grift. And she says, when I grift somebody, I'm sort of giving them what they want. I lead them there, but I make everything that they do their idea. And it's, and she, being a criminal, she equates, they really want to do it. They're rich, they're powerful, they're bored. They kind of find this whole play fun as if she's not just, manipulating them the whole time. So that's an interesting insight into her character. But I was thinking about this. The best way to get somebody to comply with your idea is to strike at something that they already have an idea about themselves. To wit, they would have done an intense psychological profile, not just on Cillian Murphy, but also on Tom Berenger's character and Cillian Murphy's dad. And so we never get to actually see the actual people. So we don't know what they are like. We just get Cillian Murphy's character. But I have to imagine that they're close to this reality because the best lies are the ones that contain the most truth. So they're manipulating him, but maybe this might be something he really wanted, and they had to have an idea that he probably felt like this, that he had a similar relationship like this with his father. Because I have seen cases of very powerful people who have watched their progeny just blow it when the company gets handed off to them, and their attitude is like, I'm breaking all this stuff up when I'm ready to retire. Here's a certain amount of assets. Go do your own thing. Be your own man. Build your own empire like I did. I did it. You can do it. And I personally, I think that's kind of an admirable thing to do. So I think it's very much possible that they wouldn't be able to get Cillian Murphy to go so far against his own character if he wasn't already at least somewhat inclined to do that. So it's still manipulative. It's not good to manipulate people, but in a weird way, they might have actually been giving him what he wanted and what he felt was best.
And I think Tom Hardy's character Eames really hit on that in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about how you need to boil this idea down to its most basic essence, and it needs to be something that they would do anyway. Otherwise, it'll be rejected.
Precisely.
Yeah, they definitely talk in the world building mechanics about how the subconscious, goes against you because it doubts what the reality that's in there. It knows what is an outsider. So they need that. And so a lot of what they're doing is basically easing the feathers, so they're less ruffled, so that they can plant the idea.
And this is also kind of why I wanted to, break off the cast into the separate, or we all agreed to do that, is because like Tom Hardy's character, he is brilliant in this movie, and the Eames character is so important. I mean, they all are, to be perfectly honest with you. They all bring something to the table. So yeah, I'm going to table that discussion, but I will just say that the Eames character, the rogue character, is really that voice of reason, which is kind of an odd thing to say, but he really is.
I want to get into that. It's a lot like hypnosis. You can't get somebody to do something that's against their nature or to self-destruct, not without intensive, not like a self-hypnotic session, not in a hypnotic session, but not without extensive brainwashing and drug manipulation and things like that. You might be able to get somebody to perform heinous acts that way. Be a programmed assassin or commit self-destruction or self-harm on themselves. So this easing into the character makes sense, and that brings me to the other point that I find interesting. Thinking about it a little bit deeper, I started to equate the levels of reality in some of the characters to the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego.
Fascinating.
Yeah, let's see, to get into that a
That
little bit.
definitely sounds plausible.
Yeah, the id, for instance, is the uncoordinated instincts and desires, that deepest subconscious, that kind of childish part of us, the primal part of us, the part that just wants what it wants. And you can kind of see that in some ways reflected in like Mal, the deceased wife. She's like this driving emotional force within DiCaprio's own mind that's just going to break down things. I want to do things. And then you have the ego, which plays your moral role. It's your critical thinking. It's that thing that overanalyzes everything. And then last but not least, you have the ego, which is the organized part of your personality, the part that realizes the structures of reality and mitigates between these other two. And I see that in the separate layers of the dream reality, because we get into like 3 layers where it gets more and more fantastical, more and more fantasy driven, more and more, whether it's like an oppressive because it needs to oppress somebody, or if it just becomes this selfish wish fulfillment, like how Mal just kind of gets really trapped in the idea of staying in the dream as opposed to the real world.
Yep.
And we also see that reflected in some of the characters, like you talking about Tom Hardy's character. He's that guy with the critical analysis of things. And you can DiCaprio's character is supposed to be the one who's mitigating between all that, but he's the broken character in there. So there's a lot of interesting things to dig in there as far as that goes. And it was like I only really thought about that parallel as we were discussing it here.
I would take it a step further, actually. The limbo area, I think that's the Jungian collective unconscious.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating too. And like you said, this movie has so many layers to it. You could just, once you start going down the rabbit hole of this movie, you could have a series of podcasts about it. There's just so many topics to discuss. Another fascinating one that, but I don't want to go too depth into, but there's this idea. One of the things that makes this movie feel real for all of us is that all of us have had dreams. And so they bring these 2 things from dreams in, which is, one is time dilation. So the further you go down in the dream world, time goes faster, so it's like 1 second in reality could be, 3 levels down could be 20 hours, or something. I forget how it works, but so this is real because all of us have had dreams, and it feels like sometimes we've been in those dreams for a day or so. And, we dreamt. In reality, we probably dreamt for like 15 minutes, maybe.
Well, I believe I read somewhere, and I don't hold me to this because I just amassed a tremendous amount of trivia in my life, and memory being flawed as is. But I read somewhere, I believe, that the average dream is only like 3 seconds long, but to us, an entire thing can play out, and it was just 3 seconds of our brain just firing off. But the vistas that are created in that moment are astounding.
Exactly. Which is amazing when you think about the power of the brain. Another thing that this movie is leveraging. The other thing I thought was fascinating was that you see at different points that the reality above whatever reality you're in affects the world below it. And this happens in real life in our dreams, from what I've understood. So it's like if you go to the bathroom, if you have to go to the bathroom and you're dreaming, you might dream of rain or something. It's like water, things like that.
I've dreamt of faucets being turned on.
Yeah, exactly.
I woke up and had to go to the toilet.
Yeah, or you hear a weird noise and it becomes something in your dream.
It's incorporated,
Yeah, so it's like this is just another, and Nolan, who wrote this screenplay, doesn't grab you and point you at this and say, "Oh, look, I'm showing you," but it's there, and it's kind of like Inception. It is so real that it makes it real for us, and it makes the movie even that more powerful because we accept it as real now. So he's almost doing Inception to us in the film by giving us lies mixed with truths, so pretty fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in the time we have left, because and we have just scratched the surface. Let's talk a little bit about the look of this film, the actual filmmaking of this film, the special effects, the execution, the shots, all of that stuff, because that could be a whole other podcast, and now I'm going to ask us to boil it down to 15 minutes or so. So good luck. Good, go gentlemen, go with God. So Steve, what kind of stuff stood out for you in the actual filmmaking aspect of this film?
Well, I will say that I really love obviously the CGI takes center stage for a lot of this, particularly when they start showing the things that are completely unreal, things that could not happen. Like the city folding in on itself. That really took a lot of work to get just right. And at the same time, it's not one of those cases where you see in a lot of CGI films where it just looks completely fake. This looks pretty convincing stuff, even though it's unreal. And because all of this is dreamlike and it's meant to be a dream, to the extent that it looks unreal, it works in that environment. So the whole concept of it, makes it so that if you didn't like certain aspects of the CGI, well, it's a dream. So I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But and you start really getting some really interesting shots, like where they're sitting down, at the table, and you can tell like it's probably in green screen involved, where everything is blowing up around them, and it looks like everything that they should be hit by some of these things, and they're not. They're just sitting there comfortably. I mean, and it's just so visually striking and visually powerful. All of the action scenes, and the dunking in the water, and how that leads to the rooms being flooded. Some of that, there may be a bit of mixture of practical and CGI, but to what extent is it? And that's really interesting, where you're really questioning the reality as presented in the film and wondering, okay, was this something that Nolan actually did practically, or is this a CGI effect? And that just adds to the complexity of the movie in itself. I just love all that.
I also, building on your point there were also scenes that were so obviously CGI, but were so well done. For instance, there is a scene when they get down into limbo. Mal and Hob built this whole world, and now it's being pulled apart, and everything is turned into like sandcastles. Mm-hmm. And so you see the huge giant buildings eroding sandcastle style. That's not real, but it looks real enough that you're so
great.
Yeah.
And I will say that some of the cuts were really brilliantly edited and executed. The opening scene where Cobb kind of lands on the beach and meets old Saito, and then it flashes back to the past. I mean, it when you watch it, you're kind of wondering if it's one continuous shot, but it's not. When you know that later on that what's really going on is the start of the movie is Cobb arriving in Limbo to get Saito out of there. Yeah. But because some of this, the location is so similar, and the people involved are the same people, you start to wonder, okay, is this one continuous dream reality, or is this a flashback? The fact that it's handled that seamlessly is honestly brilliant directing.
Well, that's the brilliance of it. He makes us question what's real the whole time from the very opening scene.
Definitely. Jeff, go ahead and take that and run with it. What kind of stuff stood out for you?
One of the things I appreciate about Christopher Nolan is that he will incorporate as much practical effects as he can, which even in this incredibly fantastical world will add a weight and realism that so far even the best CGI just can't meet yet. Like, for instance, if I'm not mistaken, in the Dark Knight, the semi tractor trailer flipping over, that was either a full-size semi or I think it's like maybe a quarter scale semi, but because it was a real object with real size, mass, and weight, it looks phenomenal when you put it in the proper setting. Likewise, in here, when all the stuff just blows up when they're out in the cafe, that was practical, Steve. That was practical. They was just staged very carefully so they didn't get hit by any debris, and they had to sit there and not react to all this crap just exploding all around them.
That was really good acting on their part too.
Yeah, I mean, that was some impressive stuff.
Especially since how many times can you reset that and film it?
It's such a huge mess. It reminds me of the one of my favorite movies, Phantasm. They were going to blow up this mausoleum. That was a big set piece for the film, and they loaded it up with all these gasoline bombs. They only had one shot. And they were telling Angus Scrim, who played the tall man, was like, "Now, whatever you do, you can't react." But there's this instinctive thing. Even like if you're somebody who likes guns, you go to the gun range, and even though it's getting ready to go bang, there's still like this instinctive wince because of the noise and explosion. And somehow Angus Scrim ignored this massive fireball. Was way bigger than anybody thought it was going to be. He just casually turns around. He's really the first guy to like walk away, the cool guy to walk away from the explosion. So hats off to DiCaprio and Elliot Page for maintaining composure in a scene where, it's not just all this debris, but imagine like they can feel the force of all the pneumatics going off, just blasting this stuff all over the place. And so I love that he does that. And like Joseph Gordon-Levitt fighting in the hallway. And so, they've got a structure on a gimbal that they can turn a classic Hollywood effect as opposed to, just creating it all in CGI. I appreciate that level of commitment to making things as real as possible, even the most unrealistic of settings. And it just shows to go all these people who want to just do CGI and everything. When I look back to the Star Wars prequels, even though I like these films, once you realize all the sets are CGI, you can't help but see it all the time. So I harkening back, missing the days like when Empire, they took an aircraft hangar and built the entire Dagobah forest. It just grounds the movie, no matter how fantastic you're setting. I love this grounding it in reality, despite all the impossibility of everything. So I love that about Nolan. I love the fact that he really wants to put things in the frame, on the screen, for the actors to react to interact with, and the fact that he knows that our minds will pick up on that thing is real, which again adds this whole layer of like, what can we believe and not believe? Because when we're in a movie that's going to screw with our heads so much, the more believability you can put in there, the more of a moment you have when it's time for those sorts of moments to arrive.
Yeah, the truth embellishes the lies, they say.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick before I get into the part that I really want to dive into, I have to give some shout out to the scene that you were talking about, the Joseph Gordon-Levitt fight scene. It goes starts in a hotel room and goes to a hallway and then eventually to an elevator. I knew that was practical effect as well. It was practical effects, the gimbal and the wire.
Mm-hmm.
It looks better than it could ever have looked at CGI. It is absolutely believable. It is so believable that my wife, who has problems with like motion sickness and stuff, cannot watch that scene. She can't watch it. It makes her sick. It's that off-putting, but it's brilliant. And the fight concept is brilliant. It's just absolutely incredible. And for all of you who haven't seen the movie, basically what happened is the level above them has become weightless. And so all of the gravity in the level where Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in disappears. And so he's fighting these people in a true weightless situation.
Yeah, they're all in a van, which is just run off of a bridge, so they're falling. And so now we talk about how like things that are happening in one layer affects what's happening in the other layer. So that's what's happening. All of a sudden they went from fighting on the ground, like the hall's turning because the van's tilting in space, and now we're weightless because we're free falling.
Yeah. And then when they hit the water, you start getting jolts, so it's like he is fighting in a completely chaotic situation, and it feels absolutely believable. And the way that Nolan switches between those two layers of reality, masterclass. Absolutely.
But look at how Levitt handles it too. It shows you like, not to get into the acting too much, but I love the characterization he's got as an actor, because he's a pro. He's the hitter. Yeah. He's the combat guy. He's a
problem solver.
And he's like, his expression is always neutral, no matter how topsy-turvy the situation he's in gets. Well, you can see the poor schmo he's fighting in the dream is like, what the heck is going on? But I'm still got to fight this guy.
Yeah. And when we get to the cast, one of the things is that in this film, he has to figure out how to give a jolt, and a jolt is a way to bring somebody back to reality. And he needs to figure out how to make people feel gravity, to feel a jolt in a place where there is no gravity at the moment, a true weightless situation. And the solution he comes up with is brilliant. So it just incredible writing by Nolan, really great acting from Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
I love this selection of the song that they use too. It's basically French for "No, I don't regret nothing."
Yeah, exactly.
So going back to the theme of regret and having to overcome regret to get out of the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. The part that I really wanted to hit on is the fact that this movie is epic in its scope and really is 5 or 6 mini movies in one. And the fact that, first of all, credit to the editing, it flows the whole time, because you start off in Mumbai, India, eventually, and then you end up in Europe at one point. Then you're in Los Angeles in a heist movie, basically, where they're chasing down. There's a chase scene going on. It's basically a thriller. Then you go down into this kind of like this con movie in a hotel, which is all fictional. And then eventually, and he films all that. Then Nolan gets down to the lowest level, and he gives us a war movie in a snow setting.
I was thinking like a Bond movie, like one of those Bond movies where he's in the snow and they have to infiltrate this place. It was like that.
Yeah, and he gives us action set pieces in every one of these films that are done expertly. I mean, he gives us a snow chase scene in the Bond setting, because I think that's more apt. I think that's a very good description, where there are people on snowmobiles and skis and they're fighting and doing all this stuff. And this is just a small part of the movie, and you have to wonder, it's like, I don't know what the budget was for this film and all the filming locations, but it's absolutely incredible.
It had to be huge.
I feel like Nolan does what Zack Snyder wants to do, grounded in a type of reality.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Nolan worked with Snyder on Man of Steel. So yeah, they probably did. Yeah,
I'm feeling a similar aesthetic, but Nolan likes to ground things very much in reality. You look at his Dark Knight; he's like takes the concept of superhero as realistic as he can, because Snyder is all about pushing the boundary of superhero, but he takes all these sorts of concepts that he probably picked up from Snyder, and he makes them work in a way that Snyder can't.
And Nolan's a better writer, and I would say he's also more methodical as a director.
Yeah,
I don't want to take this moment to bag on Snyder, but I think that where Snyder falls down for me and Nolan doesn't, is that Snyder falls in love with things and will stick with them even when they don't work.
Yeah, because my comments
all about rule of cool.
Yeah, my comments not dig on Snyder as much as like he's very much into his own particular visual aesthetic, whereas like Nolan really wants to ground it in the grim and the gritty and the realistic, and everything is, no matter, even the cleanest world is still dirty and painful, if you will.
Yeah. And Nolan will. I don't want to say that Nolan doesn't fall in love with things, but Nolan will use whatever technique or style that he needs to tell the story that he has written. And I do agree that he's a better writer, but we've been talking about it now. He used classic Hollywood techniques with the gimbal. He used CGI. He uses all of these different things very effectively. And
Nolan prioritizes the story, and Snyder prioritizes the cool thing.
Yeah. I think this movie will really stand out as Nolan's masterclass, because he covers so much in this film. This film alone shows, like, look at everything I can do. I can do anything you need me to do, any sort of genre, any sort of technique. It's all on display in this film.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that Nolan benefits, and I'll go ahead and I'll wrap up my comments with this. I think one of the things that makes this so successful for Nolan versus, and don't get me wrong, I like the Dark Knight trilogy. I really like it. But the problem with any of that, touching anything like Batman, is there's so much history there. There's so many expectations that you're bound to find people that just don't like it.
Of course.
It's like, here, this was something absolutely new that he was coming up with, and so it stands on its own.
Nolan has that with a number of his films. Tenet has the same thing. I think Tenet is brilliant. A lot of people hate it. It's the same thing.
But once again, I don't want to turn this into a Zack Snyder podcast, but you look at Army of the Dead, which was really a new concept in a lot of ways. Not new if you look at video games, because it's basically a video game. But I don't know what it is. It's just he falls in love with ideas and just chases the rabbit hole with them instead of being able to divorce himself from what he really likes instead of doing what the story needs, like Steve said. So, and Zack Snyder isn't he fairly young?
Yeah.
Maybe he'll get there.
Because
I think
he does
stuff. Yeah, So and I hope he does, because sometimes he does stuff that blows me away. So and I really like. So we can hope. And so with that, I want to thank you guys, because we're going to wrap this up. And then for everybody out there, this is Inception Part 1. Part 2, we're going to talk about the cast. We're going to talk about how this movie can apply to modern audiences. And I already think you got an idea from what we were talking about, that this movie is going to be very applicable, and then give our rating. So thank you, Steve, so much for joining me.
Oh, no, I'm always glad to talk about a Christopher Nolan movie. He's one of my favorite directors of all time. So I'm glad to be here.
Outstanding. And let's look at that sexy shirt again. Look at that. Cinema Crusaders. Go get your shirt. Go get your swag.
Then they're done that, bought the t-shirt.
And thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. Great comments, great insight. And I happen to be privy to know some stuff that you're working on that I'm really looking forward to. So watch for stuff coming out from Jeff Bracey soon.
Yep. I'm, as always, glad to be here, because I just love talking.
Well, you do it well. So
thank you.
No, this is a great discussion. You guys always break great insight. Really cool. So very wonderful. And thank you all out there for watching Cinema Crusaders. I hope you enjoyed the show. Tune in for Inception Part 2 when that airs in 2 weeks. We're going to get that. And then we're going to be rolling right into October, and we're going to be doing some scary movies.
Right, let's get into the scary stuff.
Yeah. One of the movies that Steve brought up might be one of the movies that we cover. So, and I'm not even going to say which one it is. You may have to go back and watch the podcast to find out. So until then, thank you, everybody. And on behalf of myself and my co-hosts, we're out.